The Tesla hummed more than it roared, a quiet glide under a bruised blue evening sky where storefront signs flickered awake and crosswalks breathed out the day's last warmth. Maya Bennett kept two hands on the wheel at 10 and 2, like she'd been taught back when the cars still had keys you could turn. The navigation arrow crawled toward her apartment like a promise. A canvas bag of groceries leaned against the passenger footwell, berries near the top so they wouldn't crush, a small bouquet of cheap sunflowers, and a sticky note folded twice with 3 words that could fix a week. "We're okay now." Then came the strobe. Red and blue in the mirror. One flash, then a river of it. She signaled, eased the Tesla to the curb, let the auto park prompt blink available, and ignored it. She shut off the music. She breathed in. She glanced at the camera bubble at the top of her windshield, sentry mode idle, the little dot waiting. Waiting for what exactly? Maya didn't know, but she hoped the car remembered things better than people did. A knuckle rapped the glass. "Not gentle. License and registration," the voice said from the shadow beyond the A-pillar. Her window purred down. She kept her gaze forward and her tone low. "Evening, officer. May I—" "Hands where I can see them." She froze them in midair like her own fingers had betrayed a secret. A second voice clicked behind hers near the trunk, boots scraping gravel. She could feel the attention before she saw the second figure, as if the car itself registered a weight change. Traffic slowed. Phones lifted, not as proof, but as a habit. "T. Ms. Bennett?" The first voice read from the license the second officer had already pulled, somehow from a reality where time moved faster for other people. "Step out." A pause, as if he'd heard himself repeat a line he liked too much. "Exit the vehicle," he corrected. "Right now." It wasn't a shout. It was worse, calm and bored, like asking for extra napkins and watching a person scramble. Maya swallowed, then remembered to speak. "Can I ask the reason for the stop?" The answer arrived in pieces. Headlight question. Lane drift that never happened. Then the accusation that wasn't a question and wasn't. New to the city, something about a description and a neighborhood and a suspicion. That sounded like it had been written in another decade and sent forward by, "Mistake, ma'am," the officer said, tapping the door with the side of his knuckle. "Exit now." Her palm found the door handle and hesitated. Her mind snapped to her father's voice. "If they want you out, you step out and you count your breaths." She pressed. The frameless glass dropped a fraction, and the summer air slipped inside with the smell of brake dust and pretzel salt. She stepped out carefully, the evening swallowing her height and giving her an audience she hadn't asked for. "Back here," the second officer said, pointing to a patch of cracked pavement that somehow felt like a stage. "Hands behind your head." Bystanders angled themselves like athletes finding a lane. The nearest phone trembled with excitement. Its owner tried to steady it and lost the moment anyway. "Is there a female officer available?" Maya asked, voice tightening against the collar of the night. "Do as instructed." "Sir, I'm asking for—" "Ma'am," the first officer said, and some part of his mouth enjoyed the word too much. "This goes easiest if you listen." She laced her fingers. She felt the cool of her own rings bite into her scalp. Her blouse slid against the small of her back, where sweat had already stained her. The command came again, not louder, just closer. "Feet apart." "Let's not make this difficult." Questions bloom oddly when humiliation lands. They come tangled and in the wrong order. "Why here? Why me? Did the car record that? Will anyone see?" Her chest made a small involuntary sound that embarrassed her more than anything else that followed. When the pat-down began, the sidewalk fell into church quiet, the kind that pretends respect but really hides hunger. Steps slowed. Car windows cranked down halfway. A mother swatted her son's wrist without looking, as if this were a lesson everyone took but no one passed. Someone muttered, "Let her go, man," but only with the volume that invites ignorance. The officer's hands learned things about her that no one had been invited to learn. Her jaw locked. The bouquet on the seat leaned and wilted, petals pressing against glass. She thought of the sticky note folded in the bag and felt a hate so smooth it could pass for peace. She also knew peace was somewhere else tonight. "Trunk," the second officer said after a nod with the first. "Why?" Her voice sounded new to her, careful and higher. We asked a question. "Do not make us ask it again," the first officer said. "Open it." She pressed the screen and the Tesla's rear hatch arced up like a yawn. The car knew how to be compliant. It also knew how to watch. Inside, there was nothing for a story to eat. No weapons. No contraband, just a rolled yoga mat, a folded picnic blanket, and a worn paperback about difficult conversations with a rainbow of sticky notes feathering its edges. The second officer touched the book with a gloved finger as if literature itself might confess. A soft laugh came from somewhere in the crowd, the cruel kind that finds its courage behind a phone case. Maya felt the laugh more than she heard it. The vibration traveled the distance like gossip, and then the laugh did what it always does, invited more. "Turn around," the officer said, and when she did, she met a dozen lenses stacked inside one another like mirrors in a trick photograph. Her own face reflected forever, frozen between shame and fury. The officer who had not smiled yet finally did. It broke across his face like a season arriving late. "This didn't have to be hard," he said. Words measured like a lesson that had been practiced on less crowded days. A siren whooped once, short and sharp. A punctuation mark in the middle of a sentence that had already announced itself. Tonight is not about answers. It is about power remembering it is awake. And then it ended, or rather the visible part did. They returned her license. They closed the trunk. They told her she could drive away. They told her nothing about parking a feeling. She sat behind the wheel, palms pressed to the cool ring of it. The car chimed to remind her she was still here. On the screen, a red dot blinked, and he quietly pressed save. She pulled away to the sound of small applause that wasn't for her. Phones lowered like flags at half-mast. The traffic folded her back into her, and he weekend. The road ahead looked like every other road again, if you didn't know where it started. Maya drove home without hearing her own tires. She parked. She stared at the front door, and the sticky note in the bag waited like a promise with good manners. She did not pick it up. She took a shower that didn't feel like water. She sat on the floor and watched the blinking light on her router and thought of other blinking lights. Dashes, cams, chests, and imagined them all in conversation. If humiliation is a spectacle, memory is a judge. She decided both would have company. She opened her laptop. She downloaded the footage the car had kept without asking her permission. She watched the scene once, then again, because disbelief wears disguises. She clipped the noise, boosted the dialogue, and unmasked the license plate of another driver who had only been a witness to avoid being a prop. She added a subtitle to the exact second of the command. "Exit the vehicle. Right now, ma'am." And she let it live naked in 12 white letters across the bottom of the screen. She titled the file with the date and the street like a tombstone. She pressed upload. Some minutes travel slowly. Others sprint. That night, minutes found a third way. They multiplied. By midnight, strangers knew her name and set it into microphones on mattresses in kitchens. By 1, the video had more views than her favorite musician's live session from last summer, and she hated that the comparison came to her uninvited. By 2, her boss texted, "Are you okay?" By 3, the department's official statement approached like a weather front and landed with the same wet indifference. Standard stop. Standard procedure. No violations observed. No further comment at this time. Morning brought more than sun. It brought a knock. A woman whose business card carried a quiet authority stood in the hall. Internal Affairs, it said beneath her name, but the way she asked if Maya was all right made the words feel less like a threat and more like an invitation to careful conversation. "I saw the video," she said gently. "I need to see the rest, the raw. If you're willing." Maya was willing. Willing, if not ready. She handed over the files, the car's angles, and the audio the street had not noticed it gave away. "Thank you," the investigator said. "This may take time." "I know," Maya said. But time already took something. The investigator understood. Not the whole of it, no one does, but enough. By noon, a city learned the shape of its reflection when it didn't have time to pose. In the days that followed, the city behaved like a theater with the lights up. Everyone could see everyone else deciding who they were. The department said the right words, lined up in a row like graduates who'd practiced the walk. The officer's attorney said other right words, the kinds that have been sanded down by repetition: compliance, safety, split second, and perceived threat. Talk radio found a way to make it about statistics. A podcast host with a beard you could trust told a story about his cousin and a noise in the night. A professor said the word structural 3 times without blinking. At a coffee shop, a man in a denim jacket spoke too loud, and a woman in a denim jacket listened too hard, and both left angrier than they'd arrived. Maya learned the awkward choreography of becoming a symbol. She learned how to sit straight in chairs that were too soft. She learned the difference between a sympathetic nod and a practiced one. At a small press conference organized in a borrowed community center with bad acoustics and good light, she told the story into microphones that did not deserve the intimacy. She kept her voice level because shaking gives away something you do not get back. Why did you wait to upload? A young reporter asked, doubt disguised as curiosity. I didn't wait, Maya said. I recovered. Another reporter asked if she regretted anything. A third asked about her job. A fourth asked if she'd consider running for council. A fifth asked nothing but wrote a lot. Across town, Officer Daniel Rourke, whose name had not trended until the night it did, moved through days like a man walking on a moving walkway in the wrong direction. He seemed to stay in place while everything around him passed and stared. His colleagues patted shoulders in the locker room but said less than usual. His command staff spoke to him only in sentences that began with, "until further notice." Rourke told himself the story he needed to sleep. He was following procedure. He was de-escalating. He could list every officer whose hesitation had put their photo in a black frame. He did not ask why his voice had curled into something performative when he said ma'am. He did not ask why the touch of a paperback book had felt like ownership. He made an appointment with a union rep. He went for a run down a path by the river and tried to outrun the word that kept sliding into his lungs. Unnecessary. He did not look at his reflection in the glass of the office buildings because he did not want to meet the man other people had named him. The city kept its soundtrack, clips, comments, hot takes that cooled quickly. But under it all, a quieter melody formed. Questions sung in the spaces between official answers. A civil rights attorney named Jonah Price wrote a thread that did what good writing always does. It slowed the day down long enough to see it. He asked simple things and let them hang. Why the pat-down without a same-gender officer present when one was 2 blocks away? Why the trunk search after the reason for the stop had evaporated into the theology of pretexts? Why return the license only after the public ritual had been comments and completed and the audience had had their applause? When the thread reached the investigator's desk, it did not change the facts. It changed the order in which the facts deserved to be asked. Internal Affairs requested the body-worn camera footage. They received an email reply that felt less like an answer and more like a weather forecast, clouded, with a chance of delay. The request traveled up a ladder and found a rung that had been greased by habit. The delay became a selection. The selection became an edit. The edit became a question without a subject. While the official machine ground its gears, other machines spun smoothly. The Tesla's Sentry files, redundantly saved, carried angles the department camera had not cared to. A bystander's 4K clip caught sound that the officer's mic had swallowed with road noise. A local shop's exterior camera, mounted above a neon sign that never fully worked, saw the stop begin 30 seconds before the officers reported it in their log. An invisible stitcher went to work in the city, the sort of person who knows how to put frames in order and silence between sentences, not to manipulate but to clarify. The result was not dramatic. It was worse, it was mundane. The stop began not with a drift but with an assumption. The assumption wore a uniform and expected to be trusted on arrival. The pat-down arrived not because safety demanded it, but because a script did. By the end of the week, the mayor said the word accountability with teeth that were trying to learn the shape of it. He did not say the word culture because that one is too heavy to lift at a podium. At a candlelight gathering on the courthouse steps, Maya did not hold a sign. She held a paper cup of wax and watched older women lead younger voices in a chant so gentle it sounded like prayer. A teenager asked for a selfie with her and then apologized for asking and then took it anyway with eyes that wanted to be older. A man tried to apologize for men and tripped on his sincerity, and they both smiled because earnestness is brave even when it is clumsy. A rumor sprouted and grew the way rumors do. There was more video. There was audio the public hadn't heard. A supervisor had said something in a hallway too small for secrets. Rumors do not need proof to move, but this one found some anyway. A second knock came to Maya's door. This time, the knock belonged to someone who had chosen the door knowing what it might cost him. He was small for a cop, which is to say he was average for a person. He wore civilian clothes that didn't fit the way he wanted. He spoke like a man who had practiced silence and discovered its limits. "My name's Leo," he said, and his throat tried the courage of it. "I can't. This can't keep happening." He had a drive. He had a past. He had a way of putting both on the table without making either about him. Inside, at Maya's kitchen counter, he copied files with the reverence of a ritual. He explained policies that had been written in ink and unlearned in practice. He explained the key phrase that lived between lines: officer discretion. He explained how discretion had a shadow that could stretch as long as a city if no one measured it. When he left, he did not take his fear with him. It sat at her table and asked for water. The following morning, a court received a request it could not ignore, a petition for preservation and production, filed neatly with citations that did not rely on anger to be persuasive. The petition asked for the whole, not the selected, not the refined, not the absolving minutes with the questions stripped out. The judge, who had spent a career learning how not to blink at the wrong time, signed. The department complied, as departments do when paper outweighs habit. In the footage, nothing exploded. No secret confession, no hidden weapon, no mission impossible. Just a voice that sounded too entertained by its own authority. Just hands that moved like ownership. Just a face that practiced something it did not deserve to teach. The city watched again, and this time the quiet afterward felt different. It felt like a room realizing it had been laughing at the wrong part of the joke. The hearing was not prime time. It was fluorescent lighting and microphones that picked up coughs more faithfully than truth. It was the kind of room where big things happen by accident because the small things finally line up. Maya sat beside Jonah, the civil rights attorney who organized his papers as if organization could guarantee outcome. Across the aisle, Officer Rourke sat with his counsel, the union rep, and the vague exhaustion of a man whose version of himself was beginning to look unfamiliar. Internal Affairs presented the compiled record. Exact times, exact locations, enough angles to make the room dizzy. The narrative that it held for a week, the one with space for interpretation generous enough to swallow scrutiny, shrunk to the size of what had happened. A council member asked a question that wasn't on his card. Why did the pat-down proceed without a female officer present when one was available? The deputy chief answered with policy language he believed in when he read it. It did not answer the question. The council member tried again with fewer syllables. The deputy chief responded with the vocabulary of risk. The room heard the vocabulary of ritual. Jonah's turn came, and he was not clever. He was disciplined. He asked about the trunk. He asked about the decision point before the trunk. He asked about the audit trail on the body cam edit. He walked the room through the difference between protecting officers and protecting power, which are not synonyms unless you are lazy. When Maya spoke, she did not perform. She described. The road, the command, the sound of her blouse against her back. The paperback book felt like contraband. The bouquet that wilted. The small, humiliating sound her body made without permission. She did not cry because crying would make people feel comforted by their own empathy. She did not shout because shouting gives easy villains an excuse to cover their ears. She finished, and the room had to choose whether to breathe or clap or cough. It chose quiet. Officer Rourke stood when asked, and his counsel advised him to keep it narrow. He apologized without saying, "I'm sorry." He said he respected her. He said he feared the unknown. He said training. He said protocol. He said words that sounded like a tunnel he wanted to move through quickly. A council member surprised him. "Officer, when you said ma'am, do you understand how a word can carry contempt when the tone that carries it is tired of being questioned?" Rourke stared like a man who'd never been asked to put the inside of his mouth on a table. He did not answer because there is not an answer that isn't a confession. The board recommended suspension pending termination. The mayor adjusted his jaw, calculated the arithmetic of backlash, and signed. The union vowed an appeal, as unions do. It was their job. Even when jobs ask for things dignity does not like to pay. Outside, microphones waited. Inside, paper moved. But the file had one more page no one had turned yet. The investigator, the woman with the quiet card, delivered a memo to the prosecutor that did not accuse. It illuminated. It included Leo's testimony, careful and unselfish. It mapped 5 other stops with the same choreography. The boredom in the command, the pause near a trunk, and the lingering shadow on a face. It was not a witch hunt. It was a pattern. The prosecutor, who had never wanted to become a character in a story like this, exited the building and felt the heat of the day in his suit. He knew 2 truths at the same time. Systems do not indict themselves, and sometimes they can be tricked into admitting they know the law. He filed charges that were not flashy. He filed the kind that stick. And somewhere in a small house, Leo sat with his back against a door that he had locked twice and wondered if bravery always felt this much like nausea. There's a moment the city did not film because no one noticed it would matter. It happened a month after the hearing, in a corner grocery that sold newspapers to people who still wanted ink on their fingers. Maya was buying raspberries again because hope is as much ritual as it is optimism. The cashier, older, round glasses, a posture that said he had carried boxes his entire life, looked up as he rang the fruit. He didn't say, "I saw the video." He didn't say, "You're so brave." He didn't turn her pain into his story about the time he was pulled over in '98 when his hair was still thick. He said, "Be careful with those. They bruise easily." She smiled, and it was the real kind, which is to say it was small. In the weeks between the hearing and the grocery line, other things had happened that deserved mention but did not ask for applause. The department rewrote a policy in public and trained in private. They built a requirement that seemed so obvious in print, it hurt to admit it had not been enforced. Same gender pat-downs whenever feasible, with feasibility not left to the mood of the minute. They added a line about trunk searches that turned discretion into documentation. They created an audit log for edits that made truth more expensive to distort. None of this was a miracle. All of it was a start. Officer Rourke faded from the news the way men do when systems finally remember that consequences are not vendettas. He fought the termination and won a compromise that kept him off any street that included people. He moved to another department 2 counties over, where the river smelled different and no one pronounced his name with that pause anymore. Perhaps he learned. Perhaps he didn't. The story did not owe us that closure. Leo moved apartments, then moved again. He learned that hero is a word strangers use when they want to assign you to a role. He preferred the quieter term, witness. He slept more some weeks than others. He did not regret the knock. Jonah kept his thread pinned, not as a trophy, but as an index for other cases. He took 3 more clients he couldn't afford to take, and won 2 and lost 1 and did not confuse the math with meaning. The investigator got a promotion that sounded sideways, but wasn't. She trained new hires to file things in a way that made hiding harder. She learned their kids' names because bureaucracy does not have to be cruel to be efficient. And Maya, whose name the city had borrowed and finally returned, went back to the work of living. She changed nothing and changed everything. She practiced a new habit. When crossing a street at dusk, she looked left, then right, then up, as if expecting the sky to offer advice. She resumed her small life that was never small. Work, calls with her sister about nothing, and a friend's birthday brunch where the conversation stayed on shoes and a dog who eats socks. She let herself be a person again, which is what victory looks like when you remove the soundtrack. One evening, months later, she parked the Tesla in the same spot on the same kind of road under the same early night and found herself watching the tiny red light blink. She smiled at it like an old friend who had once done something impossible and then had the decency to shut up about it. She thought about the first time she'd been told to step out of the car. She remembered the quiet, practiced tone. She remembered the hands that treated a book like evidence. She remembered the bouquet that wilted. She remembered being a spectacle and the long walk to becoming a person again. She remembered. And then she put the memory where it belonged, behind her, but not erased. People asked her sometimes if she believed in change. They asked with the earnestness of those who want to be told that the world is either ruined or repaired so they can sleep. She told them no story that simple survives sunlight. Change, she would say, is not a speech. It's paperwork and practice. It's who holds the file and who can open it. It's what we do with our hands when someone else has to raise theirs. On a fall afternoon that arrived scented with cinnamon and bus exhaust, she walked past the courthouse steps and found a new flyer taped to the stone. Community Review Board, open seats. She read it. She considered the meetings, the minutes, and the motions that would stack like bricks and make a wall or a path, depending on the hands that placed them. She pulled the pen from her bag, the one that clicked too loud and made grocery lists, looked like treaties, and wrote her name, not in protest, not in anger, in maintenance. Because the opposite of spectacle is stewardship, and it does not trend, and it rescues cities anyway. That night, someone somewhere was told to exit a vehicle. The voice might have been gentle or not. The hands might have learned or not. A camera might have saved the file, and a person might have decided whether to download it. A clerk might have filed a form, a judge might have signed, and a policy might have bent a degree closer to the promise it made the day it was written. In the story people tell themselves when they need neat endings, the city learned its lesson, and no one ever had to lift their hands for humiliation again. In the story people live, and the lesson has to be taught daily. Maya drove home with groceries and a bouquet that would make it to water. The note on her counter read, "We're okay now," in the same handwriting it had always had. And this time, when she held it, the promise felt less like an apology and more like a plan. She put the flowers in a jar that had once held pickles. She washed the berries gently, one by one, as if each had been through something. She sat. She let the house hold her. The red dot blinked on the parked car in the street, minding its own business. The city exhaled. Not in relief, relief comes with conclusions, but in rhythm. In the work of lungs, in the maintenance of breath, and somewhere in a file that would one day be needed again, a clip waited, labeled with a date and a street, the title plain as brick. Not to entertain. To remember. To instruct. To keep hands honest the next time a voice says, "Exit the vehicle. Now."